Okay, down to the questions, and I'm going to divide them real quickly. Chuck has limited time. He's got to go do a show this evening. So I've divided them into 4 categories. A few topical issues, a few horse race questions, a few trends in the campaign, and then a couple reform issues. So real quickly, and we'll do it so that we won't call it a lightning round, but we'll get short answers. Fallout from Hillary's pneumonia, either the handling of it or the illness itself.
First of all, go Nats. Sorry, guys. All right? All right, I'm sorry.
Nats.
Nats.
Gotcha.
Just we're coming. You know, we may be the kids, but, you know, before there was Chris Bryant, there was Bryce Harper. And that's all I'll say.
All right, fair enough.
Look, on the health front, obviously, I think it was the disclosure issue that was more of the problem than the issue itself. You could say that about every single unforced error a Clinton has made over the last 25 years. I first started covering politics in '92, so I feel like my entire political professional career has been about covering the Clintons and watching them do this every once in a while, which they are their own worst enemy. This was clearly, she didn't tell her staff. 2 people knew that were not family members, and they didn't tell the campaign, so the campaign was left in the dark a little bit on this. I understand what she thinks, which is no matter what I do, it's going to feed a conspiracy. She is conditioned that way and thinking that way. There is a ton of innuendo on the alt-right having to do with her health, crazy stuff. This whole thing, I get texts and emails going, how come you're not showing these pictures of her seizures? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just it is stunning what you're seeing there. But all they did, they ended up by feeding the trolls, they fed the trolls, because obviously now in hindsight, well, she was, pneumonia is not a cold, okay? Especially for somebody who's 68 years old. And more importantly, given the mission that you guys have here, we don't have any way to force them to release medical records, to force them to release tax returns. It takes shame, and shaming them into do it. But this medical issue, he would be the oldest first-term elected president in American history, and she would be the second oldest. John McCain was running to be the oldest first-term president in American history, and he released 1,000 pages, warts and all, including actual warts, okay? He had a STD in there. That wasn't the reason why it was 1,000. But he was willing. My point is that he knew it was important to people that here's a guy who had a lot of health, and he was being fully transparent. By the way, nobody cared about that other stuff, and whatever it is they fear, at the end of the day, we want to know if our presidents are healthy. And why does it matter? Paul Tsongas didn't do this in '92. Paul Tsongas died before the end of what would have been his first term. Okay? This stuff does matter. It is important.
More important or less important than the abominables comment?
Deplorables.
Is that the 47%er for her, or is it being overblown?
I think the answer is you never want to be caught attacking voters. That is bad. And she attacked voters. I don't know why she did it. There are members of her own campaign that don't understand where this came from. Because it's never, when has it ever been good? And by the way, have you noticed a pattern here? When did Barack Obama say, cling to your guns and buy? Where did he say that? Fundraiser. Where did Mitt Romney say 47%? Fundraiser. Where did Hillary Clinton say deplorables? Fundraiser. Be careful when you're in a room of what you think are like-minded people. And you would think Hillary Clinton knew there were cameras there. There's one right there, which is why I was a little more careful about what I said was in John McCain's medical file. You got to be a little self-aware there, but it was sort of, look, I think it was a powerful moment last night when Donald Trump invited up supporters to say, I'm not deplorable. That is not, now, I think it cuts both ways. Mike Pence yesterday, in his fear of not wanting to call anybody a deplorable, wouldn't call David Duke deplorable. And so the Clinton campaign thinks, while this isn't the best fight for them to have, they wouldn't have chosen it, they're willing to have this fight. But I think it hurt her. I think it wasn't helpful. It may not cost her a single vote, but it wasn't helpful.
And the last of the comment fallout questions, Trump's embracing of Putin.
I don't understand why it's not a bigger deal. I'm surprised it's not a bigger deal. I do think this is why the mainstream wing of the professional Republican Party, meaning sort of the activists, I think, that has made it, he had made some inroads where there were some Republicans going, all right, started coming aboard, watching the discipline. But on this Putin issue, it just doesn't compute for too many. So I think it does hurt him in the long run of any hope that he has of getting the reluctant Republicans to ever come back.
Okay, today is election day. Who wins?
I'd still rather be Clinton than Trump for a lot of reasons.
Narrowly?
I think the Electoral College lead is bigger than it looks in the national polls. You cannot come up with a path to 270 for Trump. Now, there are ways she's got problems recreating the Obama coalition. That's real. There is some issues with millennials not being fired up. There is some issues with Latinos and African Americans not coming out in the same numbers. And she can't afford to lose the white vote by a bigger margin and right now she is. Right now, she's getting less percentage of the white vote overall than Obama did in 12. And Obama got a record low number for a winning candidate. So that there should be, this is not a cakewalk. That said, they have the organization, and I think Trump has to win big to overcome his lack of a ground game.
How important are the debates?
It's everything.
Is it the ball game?
I think so, because they both have threshold problems in different ways. You'll hear a lot of people over the next few weeks make the Reagan 1980 comparison about Trump, right? That Reagan, it was all about whether voters had made the decision they didn't want Carter, but they thought Reagan wasn't up to the job. And the lone debate that happened, put him on he didn't scare the living bejesus, but he had to meet just a small bar. And you're going to hear a lot of people say that Trump has a similar opportunity. I actually think they both have their own low bars to clear. And perhaps Clinton's is actually an easier one. Right now there is such disdain. She's got to convince that she gets it, right? She's got to make the case that she understands that, yes, she isn't the perfect change agent. Yes, she understands that what people are looking for, that yes, she gets that she hasn't been as forthcoming and as transparent. It is just sort of, that's a threshold that I think some voters, because if you've noticed the polls, it's her number that moves. His number doesn't move, right? She's the fluid one. She's been as high as 51 or 52 and as low as 42 or 43. He has really been in a narrow range of 37, 38 in his worst days, 42 and 43 in his best days. Maybe can get up to 44, 45, but he's never really been north of that. So she's got all the fluctuation. And who are these voters? They're basically mostly college. There are a lot of college-educated men, college-educated white men, a lot of voters under 35, and that's the fluctuation. And they go from Hillary to undecided Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, into that bucket, if you think of them as one basket of, I guess we call them baskets now. The baskets of who think the election is deplorable, perhaps. And that's where they don't ever go to Trump. And I think that's the threshold that she can, if she passes that, which she did at the convention. And what happened? They all came over. That's what could happen there. I think her bar is actually lower and more opportunity for her than his. And we'll see. I think what I learned from the forum last week is that he struggled on substance for 24 minutes. All right, there's been everybody wants to talk about the moderation of that town hall, but let's be clear. Every time Matt went deep with him on anything, he basically collapsed. He got to the point where he called all of our generals' brains rubble and re-embraced Putin. That was 24 minutes. What's it going to be like for 90 minutes with no teleprompter, no audience to feed off of? It'll be an audience. It'll be literally like 100 people type of audience.
But probably the biggest TV audience ever for
biggest TV audience, but that live audience, Trump, remember the debates, Trump fed off of that. The crowd mattered a lot, the crowd in the hall, and that had an influence, I think, on how people perceive the debate. The national debates, while they have an audience, it is basically mandatory that they are kept quiet.
Johnson does or doesn't meet the threshold to participate?
I think it, if he knew where Aleppo was, he might have made it. Think about it. That happens the day after, the morning after. When you're a third-party candidate, you don't get many opportunities, okay? He was getting his moment. Everybody in the media, look, we don't want to be thought of as somehow stifling debate. Everybody has been very open about giving Gary Johnson his due, giving him opportunities on air. I've had him on Meet the Press. Not many times a Libertarian nominee makes it on Meet the Press every 4 years. I've put him on. Others have put him on. He has his moment, and he blew it. And so I do think the other thing that hurts him more is Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. If it were just a three-way, I think he could get to 15. And there is about 15 that is sitting there in the combined buckets. But she is also a reason why he can't get in.
Okay, we'll get back to the trends in the presidential. Two quick other races. What are your thoughts about Kirk Duckworth in our Senate race here, which is being called one of the most important in terms of who takes the Senate?
Here's the good news for Kirk. It is pretty clear to me that the voters are educated on the idea of split ticketing. Okay, we're seeing that trend overall. And in most of the presidential battlegrounds where there are Senate races, where the Republicans really were concerned, you're seeing the Senate Republican overperform Trump, and overall, basically, if you saw the slew of polls we released last week in just 4 states, New Hampshire, Nevada, this is on Sunday, New Hampshire, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, all of them have, 3 of the 4 are significant Senate races or were thought of as that. All were 1 or 2 point races in the presidential. Kelly, the Republican, had an 8-point lead in New Hampshire, double-digit lead for McCain in Arizona, 2-point lead for the Republican in Nevada, and a 10-point lead for the Republican in Georgia. The point is that's the good news. The voter is listening to the idea of a check on whoever wins, which is exactly what Kirk has to have happen.
That's counterintuitive, Chuck. So you're saying that the Trump problems may actually help Kirk.
It doesn't. It's that the voters are more. Barack Obama, for instance, didn't label Donald Trump a Republican at the national convention. What did he do? He said, "I know he's not a Republican. I know." The voters are the swing voters are hearing that message, right? Who does Kirk need on his side, right? He needs, if you want to put it in demographic terms, basically college-educated independents, right? Or that right now are going in droves more to Clinton than Trump. They're listening to the split ticketing. So the point is that they can be receptive to it. The downside for Kirk is I've not seen a lot of evidence that it's helping here in Illinois, and I think part of it may simply be the election year dynamics. Presidential election year in Illinois, I don't know what Republican could win. I think he already, in a normal election year, I think would be incredibly vulnerable. It's even worse when you have a Republican ticket statewide that doesn't feel comfortable working with the national party.
So the same question, if today's election day, do the Republicans keep the Senate and the House, or the Senate still?
I think they definitely keep the House. I think the Senate is a total coin flip now. And I did not think it would be a coin flip. I always thought it was basically 60% shot that all the numbers favor the Democrats. The president, but if you look at 2 important developments are the strength of Rob Portman in Ohio and Marco Rubio in Florida. These are 2 basically Senate races that have been taken off the table. Having them both taken off the table, combine that with the lone Democratic defense is Harry Reid's seat in Nevada, and they're behind. They shouldn't be, but they are, and the Republicans are in a very good race there. And that's a state where Trump doesn't hurt. Trump actually helps. Where the Senate candidate is strong on the Republican side, but where he is weak is where Trump is strong, and where Trump is weak is where he is strong. And while that doesn't help Trump, it definitely helps Joe Heck in that race. So I think it's a total coin flip. Here's what I'll tell you. If Hillary wins by less than 5 nationally, I think Republicans hold the Senate by a seat, or we're basically 1 seat, right? And we won't know on election night. It might be that close. If she wins by more than 5, there's no way Republicans can hold the Senate.
And of course, if she drops down or Trump wins, then...
Oh, well, of course. With Trump wins, you could have a net gain.
One last horse race question. I know you don't live here, but you pay attention, and we talked on the phone, and you had an interesting thought. What's your take on this blood feud in Springfield between the Republican Governor Bruce Rauner and the longtime House Speaker Michael Madigan. Tens of millions of dollars going into those races, probably some of it spent by the folks in this room.
Yeah.
But you had an interesting perspective on the nature of this race.
Well, I'm sure nobody knows who to root for anymore in this one. It feels nobody knows who to root for in this fight at this point. Look, I don't think anybody looks good. I understand what Rauner's trying to do, and I understand what Madigan's trying to do. And I think that it is sort of, it feels as if this is the last gasp of machine politics in general. And I think that it feels like it is just a knockdown, drag out to protect a political establishment in some form or another. And everybody's got their own ideological view on this, but it feels more about who is going to control Springfield, right? The legislature or the executive branch, right? It's become more about that. I'm sure for voters, that's all gotten lost. Because
and you looked at this as, when we were talking on the phone, you suggested this is sort of like, it's like an outlier in America. This is like the last of these kind of pitched battles of this sort.
It is.
There's nothing like this anywhere else in the country.
There isn't, because most legislatures, Mike Madigan is sort of the last of a dying breed. You don't have these, every state had that guy that just was the iron fist that just ran the legislature. And slowly but surely that stuff's been, in the same way that the US Congress isn't the same anymore, right? No speaker has any sort of actual power, right? It's rhetorical power at best, and it really is more, the rank and file run things more than the speaker. I think that it is interesting to just watch as a political observer in this respect, in that Madigan's the last guy left, right? There's no one guy, and Willie Brown used to be that guy in California. He's retired. Sheldon Silver used to be that guy in New York. I think he's on his way to jail. That's another story. But in most states, they've been sort of purged, right? For one reason or another. And governors have become more and more, the interest groups control the legislatures, and that's given, frankly, I think it's, in some cases, in some states, made governors too powerful. But that's another government reform debate that I won't get into here.
A few trend issues. Got an email from the wife of one of our board members, said, ask Chuck why it seems like the media favors Trump. He's on so much more. She said he's been on Meet the Press more than Hillary. The media seems to want much more of him. They get much more of him. Is it a bias, or is it just the nature of the way the two are campaigning, or the fact that he's just good for business?
And I can tell you this: a Trump supporter will say the exact opposite to me. That thinks that we are all in the tank for Hillary, and this is what I mean. Look, this is first of all, this is what I always say when I get that. It's like, okay, define media, right? Who are you referring to? As far as the networks. First of all, I think I've had Trump 5 times and Clinton 5 times. If it's 5, may have been 5-4. I've only had him 5. Anyway, but part of that is it's not as if we want to have Trump on more than Clinton. We invite her on. Trump's just more accessible. Trump was more accessible the first 6 months, first 9 months of this campaign than Clinton was. And it, not by, by a mile. He's more accessible in general. I probably personally talk to him twice a week. I'm not the only reporter. That's just one of the things for whatever reason, as much as he bashes us publicly, he obsessively wants to tell us things.
Let me ask you.
He cares. He does care what we all say and think, to the point it drives his own staff crazy sometimes. They're like, I don't know why he's watching, but he's watching.
He's watching it all. He's watching all the channels simultaneously.
Look, he's not a reader. No, and I have to say that I wish that was, he doesn't, and it surprises me that he doesn't even tell us while I'm reading this book to bone up on the history of Europe or whatever. I wish he were saying some more things like that. But this is what he does. He watches, and he watches on his plane. He constantly. He is television, and he is as one with TV.
Yeah, and speaking of TV, I left ABC 7 years ago before we got into the madness of like endless tweets and so much social media and blogging and Facebook Live and everything. How does that complicate what you try to do to have so much conflicting information flowing at you 24/7? I mean, in my days, you know, you'd get an email perhaps or a phone call, but now it just seems like you're like bombarded from 100 directions at one time.
There are times that it feels like our job is to be a filter, and sometimes that's all you feel like you have the time to do, which is a horrible place to be. I don't like it, but sometimes I think for us, I do think at this point, the best thing we can do as a news division on a day-to-day basis is be that this mattered and this didn't. A little bit of, and I think that I think overall that is where national media might go, move a little bit, which is where we can provide, you know, people get the headlines anywhere, but why do they tune in? Because they want context. They want to know. I always say the one question I have to worry about more than any other is not the who, the what, or the where, it's the why. And it's what people tune in for the most, is trying to get the why. Whatever that why is. Why might be a motivation, why might be the issue itself, but whatever that answer to the why is and whatever the why question is on an issue. And so I think that becomes a little bit of what our jobs become, but it does overwhelm to the point where you feel like, and I think it's very dangerous for reporters, because then reporters sometimes get so caught up in engaging online that they're inadvertently helping to shape stories that they should be reporting on and not shaping. You know, and there's a fine line. On one hand, I think people do want our analysis. On the other hand, let's wait till there's context to offer and not offer analysis when the story's halfway going.
Do you think that the American public is better informed this cycle or worse informed? Now, I know that if they pay close attention to the conversations on cable and the Sunday shows, and they read the op-eds and all, there's just a fount of information, but it seems like the polarization has people in a very simplistic box in listening to things.
The real crime is that most people think they are informed. Most people that are in that narrow silo. That's what's frustrating to me, is look, there are media organizations. I don't want to call them news organizations. There are media organizations that are mainstreaming innuendo, or asking such provocative questions it turns into innuendo. And I think that people, because of the personalization that you can do, for instance, on Facebook. And that's why the question about media, it's like, okay, define what media is. Where do you get, you know, there are plenty of people, you know, I've got everybody's got their internal like kitchen cabinet focus group, and I've got well-meaning liberal relatives, well-meaning conservative relatives, and I can't tell you how many times I have to beat back conspiracies that they like, hey, I read this, and then you say, well, where did you read it? Well, it was on Facebook. You know, and you're like, okay, but, you know, it's like, how do we get people to not be susceptible to an algorithm, right? To an ideological algorithm. And we're all like just sitting there. I mean, look, my late father, thank God, my parents canceled each other's vote out. And my dad was a pretty hard, you know, he was conservative, no doubt. But he also subscribed, you know, I grew up with National Review and New Republic and The Nation and different, you know, he just subscribed to it all. And the whole point is like, you got to read it all. Like it was like, he felt the civic lesson he gave me was, you got to get all of it and make up your own mind, but you need to know both sides. You need to know this is where, you know, one line of thinking is, this is where the other. And I kind of think like the American public needs this lesson again. And you know, I worry sometimes that maybe civics teachers are so afraid of parents accusing them of political bias, you know, and we've got so many parents that are, I think, incorrectly policing this, that we're narrowcasting everything, and we're not promoting the idea that you know, of understanding how to read political opinion anymore. So, look, it's a mess. But I think that I always say, as much as people want to say the media, I always say to viewers and consumers, everybody's got to look in the mirror. Everybody does. Because everybody's got to do their part of making sure they're not just falling in line and just getting stuck in their own ideological
And
silo.
speaking of looking in the mirror, what do you think Hillary and Trump do for the next 2 months after looking in the mirror and listening to their advisors? What do they do to deal with this unprecedented level of dislike and distrust for both, and the perhaps unprecedented, although perhaps just a continuing level of polarization in the country?
Look, the single most important question I want both candidates to answer is, tell me concrete ways you think you can restore trust in government. Because ultimately, that to me is the number one problem in the country right now. Because you cannot, we know what and I say it this way, economic inequality may be a bigger problem. The idea that we don't know where the next jobs are coming from for a lot of working class and middle class Americans is a huge problem. But we can't start dealing with it if we don't have a sense of trust in the leadership of this country, and it's gone. And neither one of these two are going to walk in with a majority believing they should be there. It's going to be a reluctant election. What are they going to do? What are some concrete ways that they're going to do this, that they're going to restore trust? Because if you can't restore that trust, then you're not going to be able to get everybody together to do what's necessary to start tackling income inequality, to do what's necessary to create a consensus in this country to figure out how should America use its international superpower, right? We're a superpower, we just don't know how to use it anymore. And we certainly fail at it when we do anything in the Middle East, right? We do too much or too little, none of it works. But the point is that if we don't restore the trust, you can't then have the ability to lead. And I think it's a huge, and I don't know how either one. I think governing is going to, if you think the last 8 years were dysfunctional, we're going to look back as the golden years of the 21st century. We're going to be like, man, remember the good old days of Boehner and Obama? You know, they used to at least smile at each other when they couldn't get anything done. You know, that's what I fear the next 4 years are going to be like.
And the lack of trust in government is one of the things that organizations like ours are here for, and it's not misplaced. I mean, our democracy's been hijacked by the insiders who've set up all these institutions in government and the election system to basically stay in power and basically ward off challenges. And I haven't heard a word in this campaign, nor did I see much in the way of Obama's 8 years, that dealt at all with the problem of a hijacked democracy.
Look, and it's not just that. Look, the millennials, what social media, what sort of the digitization of our media consumption has done, coupled with sort of, I think, the millennial mindset, which I think millennial mindset. I mean, don't forget, we earned Washington earned this distrust, right? Lying about the war in Iraq, lying about the recession, you know, that feel, whatever, you know, this feel as if, boy, they were all they were in cahoots, right? So this trust issue is widespread with the electorate, right? It's not just a distrust of Republicans running government or a distrust of Democrats running government, right? It is sort of distrust of, and look, politically, Trump has been brilliant about lumping Bush's and Clinton into the same bucket, right? He wants to run as that outsider a little bit. And it's no coincidence that I don't know if there's a Bush cabinet member that's not supporting Hillary, right? When one comes out, if they're certainly not supporting Trump. They're either for Clinton or saying they're not for Trump. So there definitely is that divide. So it's well earned. Look, transparency is the new objectivity, right? I think that's what particularly millennials expect. So the old ways of being able to say one thing over here and over there is gone. And I think we have two candidates that are generationally don't quite get it.
Two questions, and I'll let you go back to work. One, are you pessimistic about the future? You're pessimistic about the likelihood of a dysfunctional administration, regardless of who wins. But what about the future? I mean, I have to sell hope in the face of an awful lot of demoralization and cynicism and just a feeling that you can't change these rigged systems.
No, my optimism is millennials, and in this respect. There is an impatience. You know, millennials get accused of two things that I think are strengths. Number one is an impatience, and number two is a little bit of selfishness, right? But I think that that impatience also can help drive innovation, that impatience can drive reform. And I think there is just, I also look at the millennials, if you look back at the last generation that felt as if they did both our economy and government good, right, was the greatest generation. And if you think about the two sort of searing formative events for the greatest generation, one was the Great Depression, and obviously the other is World War II. What was the consequence after it? Well, it created what I would argue, a generation that felt very community-oriented, a generation that felt as if after they've given, it was time to give back. I mean, think about all of the different just community clubs that sprouted up and took hold in the 50s and 60s. So it was all the sort of this greatest generation, and there was that sense of positive views of government, positive views. So millennials, think about the two formative events for them. One is 9/11 and one is the Great Recession. So I think that going through these struggles and watching their parents go through struggles in the same way the greatest generation did. I mean, my grandmother, she grew up at south side of Chicago, and she and her brother shared a bedroom, as she used to say growing up. It would be, she said, my brother and two others, meaning who knew at any given time? Cousins, the kids of somebody else. It was, that was that era. Everybody pitched in and helped each other out. Everybody, and she said, as a kid, I resented it, because you didn't have your own space, or, and she and her brother would complain about it. But it also was building a sense of community in those kids, right, in that generation. That's my hope. I think millennials, the sort of the impatience is what we need right now. And as soon as my fear is that millennials don't think government's a good place to enact change. My fear is too many millennials are headed west. They all want to go west because they feel as if I have a better shot at solving the social injustice that I care about the most via activism over here, via this NGO over there. Or maybe they don't see Washington as a place, and if we don't have the best and brightest wanting to go to Washington. I mean, we have just the worst candidates running right now. The best qualified people won't do it. The people that recruit candidates, Democrat or Republican now, are finding it harder and harder. Because too many smart people, like many people in this room, I bet you there's a bunch of people in this room that when they were in their 20s always thought they'd run for office, and now when they have the comfort and the ability to do it, look at it and go, why would I put myself through that? My reputation's going to get dragged through the mud, and then what happens if I win? I'm going to be 200th in seniority in the U.S. House, and what does that get me? Nobody sees Washington as an agent of change. And that, to me, is what the next president needs to create. And I think a lot of people thought Barack Obama would do that more. And I think for the first term, it did attract a whole bunch of people wanting to come in. But cynicism is built back up again.
And one last question. So can you see any government reforms that might be game changers? We talked about redistricting reform here. There's term limits. There's all kinds of ways to make the election system more open. But all of those levers are controlled by the people in power.
No, I know.
And they don't want to let go, and they don't want to change. So I think a level of hopelessness is understandable.
It is. I'm not a big fan of term limits because I think term limits, you know who is not term limited? Lobbyists. So, and I know of, if you go to state capitals where term limits has been enacted for the last 20 years, and when it was big in the early 90s, I've talked to lawmakers who say, I'm like, they, especially a part-time legislature, and then, he'll say, I go to a lobbyist I trust to tell me about bills that I don't have time to read. And it was like, for number one, that's why part-time legislatures to me are a problem. Number one, and this is where term limits can get you. I think because who's the person that's been around for 25 years? If you don't have, there's nothing wrong with having experience in a legislature. In fact, I would argue the experience is more helpful than hurtful. What's wrong is when too many people get rich while they're in office. That's what drives me up a wall, right? You sit there, and we've done this before, and it's like, it is amazing the net worth you go to any member of Congress that has been there for 20 plus years, and you look at their net worth when they got there and their net worth, then you're like, well, how did that happen?
And they're not even allowed to have second jobs.
No, but it's amazing how many of them are able to sell property for a huge profit. That's what's always, it's amazing. Well, it was a real estate transaction. It just happened to be they owned a piece of real estate near a highway that might get developed, right? Or something. I mean, it's astounding, and it's all legal.
So if you're king for a day, what do you change in the next 2 days to give us a healthier system?
Well, number one I would do is I would bring all money in. I don't believe you'd ever, it's the American way, we're never going to have fully funded elections, government-funded elections, so I wouldn't do that. I would make it unlimited, instant, and I would add this caveat. Anybody who has to disclose publicly in every single advertisement, anybody that gives them more than $100,000. So you're willing to take unlimited amounts of money. So if you wanted to take $6 million from one person, you'd say, fine, I'm Joe Schmengi, and I approve this message, which was paid for by Jane Schmengi over here, who, you know, you have to, if you had to say the name of every donor that gave you more than 100 grand an ad or something, let's say whatever that benchmark is, do you know what most donations would look like? $99,999. The point is, you can create, and I pulled a number out. The point is, there is a way to legislate money in a free market way, right? Which is, you can give us all you want, but if you give this much, then it has to be disclosed on TV and in every paid mail or things like that. I think you have, as long as the courts say that, I think that's number one. And then I would try this. I don't know if it would work, but I would like to try no fundraising in odd years for anybody. No member of Congress, no member of the Senate, and nobody running for president. If you could not raise any money, now the problem is they'd start a PAC or this or that, but I would love to see if anybody that was elected and serving in Congress and serving in an elected office could not appear at a fundraiser in the off year. What would that do to legislating? I would like to try that.
So money would be your focus?
It would be, because I think that is, we now schedule, Congress has 3-day weeks so that they can raise money the other 4 days. All right, and it's a full, and if you're by the way, if you're in a competitive seat, I understand why they're doing it that way. You have to raise $50,000 a week if you're in a competitive seat.
I never forget Paul Simon saying when he announced he was not going to run for re-election, the reason was he had calculated that if he ran again and won, and for the next term, for the next race, which would cost $20 million, he'd have to raise $10,000 a day, every single day. And that was just too daunting. What time does that leave you?
It doesn't leave you anything. You're sitting there all the time doing that, and nobody likes to ask for money. Look how uncomfortable everybody was.
I disagree with that one.
And there, other than Andy here, who wants you to give money for this and get that Chris Bryant jersey. So I think that, look, here's another thing that has gone on, is that there is an unelected group of powerful people, mostly because of their what they mean to financially, that I think have too much influence in Washington. All right, and it is, you can watch special interest groups and they're now more effective than ever at killing anything, because they just find the one thing they don't like, and then they can kill an entire, all the big tax, if you rewrite the tax code, right, one of the things you have to mess with is the mortgage tax deduction. Realtors can kill that in a heartbeat. And the thing is that's now, and I don't want to just single out realtors here on this, but the point is that every now piece of legislation has a powerful interest group that knows how to find the one thing to kill it, to make it seem like, oh, it won't go over well in the public. And the lawmakers feel like they have to listen to these folks because of how constant this fundraising need really, really is. There's no perfect solution, but I'd like to see something tried.
All right, we'll let you get back to work.
Okay.
Chuck, Todd, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.